So the first question you may have is, what is unified messaging? Well, the unified messaging server role was introduced with Exchange 2007, and it's a role that's designed to provide a universal inbox. What that means is email, voicemail, and incoming faxes will all be able to go through the unified messaging server role and will eventually end up in your mailbox. In addition, the unified messaging server role provides an auto attendant. That auto attendant answers the phone when individuals call into your company or when persons try to dial other extensions within your company, and it allows both voice and keypad input. So we're familiar with auto attendants. For example, when we're asked to say 1 or press 1, we know that an auto attendant is behind the scenes waiting for our response. If the auto attendant doesn't understand our verbal responses, then we can use the keypad to substitute. The role also provides access to our inbox, calendar, contacts, and more, all through our phone. So we can call into the auto attendant as well, and we can access our own information through the unified messaging server role. So how does unified messaging work? Well, it integrates with your existing call system. So for starters, your business is connected up to the Public Switch Telephone Network, or PSTN. And typically this is provided through trunk lines. Now before you get too nervous with all the new terminology, the PSTN is something that your home is connected up to as well. And instead of a trunk line, you're connected by a single line usually. Some homes may have more than one telephone line connected into the home. And so on a home level or a small business level, you may pay for additional lines. But when you get to an enterprise business level, where you might have 10, 15, 20, 100, 1,000 different lines, well, in that case, you're going to make a deal with the telephone company to provide trunk lines. A trunk line allows you to have multiple phones connected up to a minimal number of lines. So if you think about it, let's say you have 100 people in your company and 100 telephones. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean that you need 100 telephone lines. You might have a trunk line that only includes 50 connections or 25 connections, depending on how often you feel your people need to use the phone. But you still have the ability to provide 100 phones to all of the people in your company. You're just hoping that they're not all on the phone at the same time. Certainly if it's a call center, you want to make sure you have one line for each individual person. So you can understand that your company is connected to the PSTN through trunk lines. Now the device that typically handles taking that trunk line and branching it out to various extensions is called a PBX, or Private Branch Exchange. The PBX will take the lines and split them up so that users have phones with extensions. Now, in your organization, in your environment, you may have a PBX already, and hopefully you also have a telephony expert that handles all of this. These days it's difficult enough to be a network administrator, and even more difficult to be the Exchange messaging administrator. So you don't want to focus too much on the telephony side to your unified messaging installation. Now, as far as getting your unified messaging server connected into the mix, you're going to need a way to connect into this PBX or to connect to the trunk lines themselves. So one possibility is to implement a voice over IP gateway. What this will do is it will integrate with your PBX. It will be the go-between between your unified messaging server and the PBX. Now, in a real-world environment, one of the things you're going to need to do in order to make sure this works is check with the Microsoft list of approved legacy PBXs and voice over IP gateways. Some PBXs, if they're too old, will still not work with a voice over IP gateway. So you're going to want to go to Microsoft's website and look for the list of approved devices for a unified messaging solution. If your PBX is on the list, then you can get a voice over IP gateway, and that will allow the unified messaging server to talk to the PBX. However, if you're starting from scratch, or if you have a legacy PBX that's too old, then you might want to go in a different direction. It would be easier then for you to use an IP PBX. This allows you to connect to the unified messaging server as well as provide the extensions from the trunk lines coming in. And it does it all with one box. In either case, however, what will happen is when a user calls in and they try to access one of these extensions, if the user doesn't pick up their phone, then they will be routed to the unified messaging server. The auto attendant will answer, and they can leave a voicemail. That voicemail will go into the mailbox of the person that they've called. And once we get our unified messaging server up and running, you're going to see this in action. But it's important to mention right at the outset, whether you go with the voice over IP gateway that connects to your legacy PBX or with an IP PBX, in both cases, because this requires advanced telephony skill, you're going to want to make good use of your telephony expert. Perhaps you have one on staff or a team already on staff. You're going to want to utilize that team and not take it upon yourself. If you're doing this from scratch and you don't have a telephony expert, well, it's recommended by Microsoft that you get one. If you remember from our scenario, Globomantics wants to take a look at unified messaging and hopes to implement it at some point in the future. So during our installation, we installed the Unified Messaging Server role for Exchange 2010. However, at this time, Globomantics doesn't want to implement unified messaging across the organization. So you and your team have sat down and decided, even though you're not going to be able to implement unified messaging at this time, you would like to set up unified messaging in a lab environment. Now, there are a couple of different ways you can do this. For example, you can implement a virtual machine that's a virtual IP PBX. One of the things you could do is just set up your server and configure it, and then hope that it works just fine. On the Exchange server itself that's running the Unified Messaging Server role, you can run the test-um connectivity commandlet to see if the system is configured properly, but there's no fun in that. Another thing you could do is you could actually install the test phone, which comes with your Exchange installation. This is a soft phone like Skype that lets you call your Exchange Unified Messaging Server and test to see if the auto attendant works. But a feature like that only provides a limited amount of testing capability. Well, the Globomantics team wanted to see this in action for real, and so they contacted Microsoft. The Microsoft teams responded with a couple of different options on setting up a proper lab. One of the options included using an AudioCodes MP114 voice over IP gateway, which is a tool that the Microsoft teams use themselves when they're doing demonstrations. This gateway includes 2 FXS ports and 2 FXO ports. So you might be wondering, well, what does that mean? Well, FXS stands for Foreign Exchange Subscriber Interface. This is the port that actually delivers the analog line to the subscriber. So it might be likened to the plug on the wall that delivers a dial tone, battery current, and ring voltage. So if you happen to pick up a little box that does something similar to the audio codes, for testing purposes, this is where you're going to plug in your phones, into the FXS ports. The FXO port stands for Foreign Exchange Office Interface, and this is the port that receives the analog line. In a test environment, you can connect your FXO ports directly to the public switch telephone network. In a real environment, you would connect it up to your PBX. And of course, you also see you have an Ethernet connection here, and that connection is actually going to go to a router of some sort so that you can have connectivity to the unified messaging server. So in the Globomantics lab, we're going to have 2 extensions, extension 2001 and extension 2002. And we're going to give these extensions to 2 different users, test user 1 and test user 2. So what we're going to do is we're going to configure our unified messaging server to work with 2 different users that we've created, test user 1 and test user 2. And then we'll have test user 1 call test user 2, and we'll see what happens. But before we can do that, we have to configure our server. So here are some of the things that we need to configure on our unified messaging server. Under the organization configuration, we're going to create a dial plan. When we do that, it's automatically going to create a unified messaging mailbox policy. You can go back and adjust that policy at any time. We're also going to create an IP gateway. What that's going to do is connect our unified messaging server up with our audio codes box. And last, we're going to set up an auto attendant so that someone answers the phone when we call. Then we're going to go to server configuration, and we're going to set the dial plan for our unified messaging server. Last but not least, we're going to go to the recipients and we're going to enable our two recipients for unified messaging. At that time, we'll configure their extensions, their PIN, and their policy settings. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, and here we are on our New York Exchange server, and we're not going to do anything that would be permanent to the server, because you remember, Globomantics has not given us permission to really enable unified messaging on an enterprise level. So this is not something that we're going to enable for the entire company. However, in our test environment, we're going to enable unified messaging, get it set up, and get it to work with a couple of test users. That's something we can do on this server without affecting anyone else in the company. And so we look at our two users, test user 1 and test user 2. At the current time, they're not enabled for unified messaging. To do that, we could click this link down here, but it would actually not work at this time because we haven't configured our server. So to start off with, we're going to go over here to the organization configuration node under unified messaging. You can see that there are 4 different tabs: dial plans, IP gateways, auto attendance, and mailbox policies. All of these tabs are empty because we haven't even configured the dial plan yet. That's the first thing you would configure to start working with unified messaging. So let's click New dial plan. To start with, we'll give it a name. Now it asks us the number of digits in extension numbers. This varies. In some companies, perhaps the extensions are 3 digits. So you dial 134, 135, 136, and that gets you to the other people in the company. But in our case, we're working with 4 digits, and that's just because that's what we decided. So 4-digit extensions. Now what about the URI type? Well, you can see that there's telephone extension, E.164, SIP URI. We're not going to even begin talking about these things at this time. This is just an introduction to unified messaging. So we're going to leave it as telephone extension and leave some of those other scary terms for a later video. Then there's voice over IP security. You can leave it as unsecured, or you can choose SIP secured and secured. So again, we'll leave it as unsecured. We're just looking to test here. Now what about the country or region code? Well, if you have a country code that you want to put in there, you can type it in. Then click New. Okay, and so we have our dial plan. Now one thing you should note is that under mailbox policies, a policy is automatically created. If we open up that policy, you can see some of these items are pretty easy to understand. Allow missed call notifications, allow message waiting indicator, allow inbound faxes. If you allow inbound faxes, you're going to have to provide a partner fax server. We'll talk about that a little later. Allow voicemail preview, Outlook voice access, play on phone. We're going to talk about some of these features as well. So you can see how the policy relates to various features that the unified messaging server role provides. You can turn those features on or off with the click of a button. You can also see a few other options here as we go down the line, but that's what's created as soon as we create our dial plan. We can also go back to the dial plan, and we can make changes to the dial plan settings. You can see it's a little bit more extensive. After you create the dial plan, you can go back and you can change some of the options within the dial plan itself. The next step is to create a IP gateway. Now all we're doing here is telling our unified messaging server where our audio code's voice over IP gateway is located. So if we click New IP gateway, we give it a name, and then if we've implemented the gateway in our domain server, we can use the fully qualified domain name. In this case, we'll just put the IP address, and that's something you would have had to establish on the IP gateway yourself. And then here we choose the dial plan. We only have one dial plan, so it makes it nice and easy. Okay, so we're moving along here. The last thing we want to configure is the auto attendant. Keep in mind that the auto attendant is the computerized voice that's going to pick up the phone when the user doesn't answer the phone, and it will give the individual on the line various options to choose from. The auto attendant is good for persons that call in and maybe they don't know exactly who they're calling for. Maybe they don't know the extension. So that's one great feature of the auto attendant. The auto attendant is also useful for checking your own inbox. So when you call into your own inbox, the auto attendant will ask you, what would you like? Would you like your calendar? Would you like your inbox? Would you like your contacts? So the auto attendant is very helpful. Certainly we need to create one in order for it to work, though. We'll provide a name. We'll connect up to a dial plan, which in this case we only have the one again. And we'll provide a pilot identifier list. This allows us to call the auto attendant. And then we can create the auto attendant as enabled and create the auto attendant as speech enabled as well. If you don't select that option, then the auto attendant will only be able to work with keypad access, which is fine. That's completely your choice. But in this case, we want it to be speech enabled. We'll click New and Finish. And here we see the auto attendant is created. Now if we go back into the auto attendant, you can see that we have more options here. There is a default greeting during business hours. There's a non-business hours greeting as well. There's informational announcements. And you can modify these as well so that perhaps you don't want the default greeting, perhaps you want a specialized greeting. Maybe the president of the company would like to make the greeting himself. So you can actually record his voice, save it as a WAV file, and then you can use that for the greetings. You can also adjust the times, establish various features, and a whole lot more. But again, at this time, we're just looking to get the server up and running without going too deep into all of the features. Okay, so you might think, all right, well, we're done. We have it all configured. But in actuality, the next step is to go to Server Configuration under Unified Messaging. And here's your server. If we open that up, there's a Unified Messaging Settings tab. And all we have to do here is add the dial plan to this server. So once that's done, now that server is ready to handle that dial plan. Okay, we still have a little bit more to do. If we go back to recipient configuration and we look at our mailboxes, we need to enable unified messaging for test user 1 and test user 2. So if we click Enable Unified Messaging, the first thing we need to do is choose a unified messaging mailbox policy. Now we already have one of those, so we'll just choose the default policy that was created. The next thing we want to do is establish PIN settings. Now we can say automatically generate PIN to access Outlook voice access. If we do that, the PIN will be created automatically and will be sent to our inbox. But in this case, we'll manually specify the PIN just because it's easier. And I just used all 121212 just to make it easy. We click Next. Now here it says manually entered mailbox extension. So in this case, user 1 is going to have the extension 2001. And we click Next. Now keep in mind, if you wanted to do this in bulk, there are ways to do that through PowerShell commandlets, and you can certainly do that. We're just doing it this way because we're just testing 2 phones and 2 users. Okay, and so the first user is configured. Let's enable user number 2. Okay, so the procedure is the same. We're going to use the same policy. We're going to manually specify a PIN. And this time, for the manually entered mailbox extension, we're going to use 2002 for our second test user. Okay, so now we have unified messaging configured. We have our dial plan, our gateway, our policy, and our auto attendant configured. We have it configured for this particular server. We have 2 test users. They both have extensions. Test user 1 has 2001. Test user 2 has 2002. That's all we need to do on the server side. So now let's go back to our slides and let's talk through the test that we're going to perform, and then we'll see if the test worked. Okay, so we're actually going to pretend to be test user 1, and we have extension 2001. We're going to pick up our phone and we're going to call extension 2002. The first thing that's going to happen is test user 2's phone is going to ring. But being that we have no test user 2, he's off on some fake vacation, well, that phone is just going to ring and ring and ring until finally the unified messaging server auto attendant is going to pick up. And at that time, we're going to leave a message. Okay, so you can't see me do this, but I'm picking up the phone and I'm dialing 2002.
After the tone, please record your message. When you finish recording, hang up or press the pound key for more options.
Hello there, test user 2. We're just testing to see if our unified messaging server is up and running. Thank you. Bye. Okay, and that's all there is to it. So you might be thinking, well, how do we know the message went through okay? Well, now let's go and log into the account of test user 2 through Outlook web app and see if he received that message. And while we're at it, let's take a look and see how voicemail preview worked out. Okay, so here we are on a user's machine, and we're going to log into Outlook web app as test user 2. And we'll put in our password. Okay, and here we see the voicemail that we put in. Now, notice it says, "Hello there, test user 2. We're just testing to see about reunified messaging server is up and running. Okay, bye." Now, you can see this isn't exactly what we said. We said unified messaging server, but it takes a best guess. Now, if we weren't sure about what was said and if the message didn't come through too clearly, we can always look here and we can actually click the attachment in order to play the MP3. Now, in this demonstration, we're using Firefox. Let's take a look at how this looks in Internet Explorer. Okay, and here you can see we have the preview, and we also have the ability to play the MP3 right from within Outlook web app through Internet Explorer. But you can see how great this is that our voicemails are coming straight in to our inbox. Let's go back to our slides now and talk about some of the other features to the unified messaging server. Additional unified messaging features include Outlook Voice Access, which is where users can call their inbox in order to access voicemail, email, calendar, contacts, and so forth. All of those items will be read to the user with text-to-speech, and then the user will be given options as to what they would like to do next. So one of the great features to Outlook Voice Access is not only that you can call in and get your information, but you can also make changes, update the information in your calendar, your contacts, and so forth. So you'll be able to, let's say if you're running late for a meeting, you'll be able to call in and let the other team members know that you're running late through Outlook Voice Access. The next feature you've already seen is Voicemail Preview. You were able to see how we left a message for test user 2, and the unified messaging server took that message and used speech to text to put a preview in the inbox. It uses best guess for words that it doesn't understand, and so you can see it wasn't perfect. It's not going to be perfect every time, but it's a real easy way to get the gist of an email. And sometimes when we're listening to voicemails, maybe we feel like, oh man, they went on for 5 minutes. I don't have time for this. Voicemail is supposed to be something that helps us when it comes to our work, not hinders us. So by having the preview, you can quickly see what this message is about, and if there are any points that you didn't get, you can always go back and listen to that message. Another unified messaging feature is incoming fax. Now with Exchange 2007, the incoming fax service was included with Exchange. With 2010, the feature requires a specialized fax vendor that will allow faxes to be sent to your inbox. Those faxes will come in TIFF format. Now, one of the nice things about this change is that typically a fax vendor will also have the ability to allow outgoing faxes. So you may never have to touch a fax machine again if you're using the right vendor. Another great feature is Play on Phone. This allows users to play their voicemails on a phone rather than through their computer speakers. You just might imagine in a work environment that you don't want to play your voice messages that are in your inbox, perhaps through your computer speakers for all to hear. Now, you can always get a set of earbuds or a headset, but how much easier is it to just shoot it right over to a phone and then you can listen to your voicemail that way? And last but certainly not least is the auto attendant, which really is an excellent feature for unified messaging. There's a default set of prompts, but you can also establish company specific prompts so that you can really make that auto attendant almost like a free employee for your company. The auto attendant will answer the phone for your company, will transfer calls and so forth, and you don't even have to put it on the payroll.